For Britain, the next European elections in 1999 will mark a major break with tradition. For the first time, members of the European Parliament will be chosen under a system of PR, proportional representation. It means an end to constituencies as they exist now. Instead, England will be divided into 9 regions. Scotland and Wales will also count as individual regions for these elections. Each region will have a predetermined number of seats, and voters will have to choose between lists of candidates put forward by the parties fighting the election. Independents can field their own lists, so they won't be excluded, but you'll be able to vote for one list only, not to pick and choose individual names on it. The seats will be allocated according to an agreed formula based on the numbers of votes cast for the various lists. Northern Ireland, which was a single region in previous European elections, will keep its existing and rather different version of PR. Some claim that the specific PR system Westminster has chosen for the European elections gives too much power to the central party machinery at the expense of regional branches and local activists. But the various political parties are each using a different method to choose their candidates, some providing for more grassroots involvement than others. Confusingly, a slightly different version of PR is being adopted for the elections to the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly, also to be held in 1999, just a month or so before the European elections. A heavy publicity campaign in advance of the voting is likely to help, but there may still be some confusion for voters entering polling booths and finding different voting slips from usual, and a variety of lists to choose from. It seems inevitable that the existence of the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly will change the relationship of Scotland and Wales as far as the European Union is concerned, arguably giving them a more distinct and individual voice in the EU's corridors of power. That, in turn, of course, will affect England's relationship, especially if the government's idea of regional assemblies is taken forward. Turnout for European elections in Britain has not been especially good, roughly comparable with local elections. Compared with the rest of Europe, our performance has been somewhat discouraging. Interest has also varied from region to region, with the lowest turnout being in the old heavy industrial areas of northern England. Supporters of PR say that's because in the first-past-the-post system, votes for losing candidates are wasted. PR is supposed to help address that by returning a more representative sample of members, their numbers in each region reflecting the proportion of votes gained by their parties. In that way, it's argued, no votes are wasted. But what exactly are you voting for in the European elections? The European Parliament is the only directly elected institution of the European Union. MEPs are there to represent the interests of the people who elect them. Where Europe-wide legislation is concerned, their job is to stand up for the interests of their electorate, as well as keeping an eye on the wider picture, what's often called the general good. The European Parliament now has considerable powers to amend and even to reject proposed European laws. Members sit according to their political groups, not by nationality, and they sit in a far less confrontational style than at Westminster. There is no government and opposition here. Instead, there's a range of groupings that stretch across the whole political spectrum, from far left to far right. Members also sit on specialized committees, discussing proposals for laws and regulations put forward by the European Commission. MEPs must research and write reports, which are then adopted, often with amendments, by that committee before going before a full plenary session of the Parliament, either in Brussels or in Strasbourg. As in Westminster, there are first, second and third readings in the European Parliament, and, since the Maastricht Treaty, in cases where Parliament disagrees with the Council of Ministers, there's now an official system of arbitration to come up with a compromise both can accept. In some extreme cases, and it has happened, the members can simply refuse to accept the Council's idea of what a particular new law should be, and can vote to throw it out altogether. Members spend much of their time in Brussels, but 12 times a year they must travel to Strasbourg for plenary sessions. They must also travel to research their reports, for instance, or to meet with parliamentarians from other countries. Furthermore, they alone can decide to accept or reject the budget for the whole European Union, which gives them a policing role as far as the EU's spending is concerned. If they don't like it, they can reject it altogether, a drastic step they've actually taken on 2 occasions when they were especially unhappy with Commission spending plans. The EU has a number of institutions, but it's the Parliament, the Commission and the Council of Ministers that decide on legislation. The Commission is a kind of civil service, made up of people chosen by member state governments to become commissioners. They have separate areas of responsibility, but they take decisions collectively. It's their job to ensure the member states do what they're meant to do, according to the various treaties, as well as putting forward proposals for European laws. The Council of Ministers is made up of the ministers of the 15 member state governments. They meet according to their special areas of responsibility. For example, councils of agriculture ministers, environment ministers, finance ministers, and foreign ministers. In some areas, they alone have the final say, but in an increasing number of instances, they must reach common agreement with the European Parliament. This is called co-decision, and it gives MEPs a bigger say in lawmaking than they've ever had before. When the Council meets, it meets behind closed doors, and different countries often put a different spin on decisions. The Parliament's debates and most of its committee meetings are open to the public and the press. What it does in public. When the EU started in the 1950s as a common market for coal and steel, its Parliamentary Assembly was made up of members nominated by their own parliaments. Its powers were limited to offering advice, and it stayed like that until 1979, when the first European elections returned a parliament directly elected by the voters. It still had little power, but the project to create a single market showed the need for a faster and more efficient way of making decisions than Europe had needed up until then. The European Parliament was given powers to help make the single market a reality by dealing quickly with the massive raft of legislative work required. The Maastricht Treaty in 1991 and the Amsterdam Treaty in 1997 put the Parliament in a pivotal role for most of the EU's legislative programme. Thanks to amendments by the European Parliament to laws put forward by the Commission, Europe's streets and beaches are cleaner, its roads are safer, its food and drinking water are better protected, and genetic engineering must take more account of public concern. It's not just Britain's voting system that's being changed. Quite a lot of things are changing in Europe. The EU is going to get bigger early next century, as several former communist countries of Eastern and Central Europe join the club. For that to go ahead, however, there must be reforms to some existing aspects of the EU. The structural funds, for example, set up to help underdeveloped regions and areas of industrial decline, must be reorganized in order to extend them to new countries joining the EU. That means some areas of Britain that currently benefit from job-creating grants may find they'll have a fight on their hands to keep them. The same applies to the common agricultural policy, which still consumes about half of the EU's annual budget. It must be reformed before the new countries join, but it would have to undergo radical change in any case. The EU's international partners and the World Trade Organization will insist on reforms as part of a move towards global free trade. Another massive change on the horizon concerns economic and monetary union. 11 of the 15 member states will go ahead with creating a single currency from the beginning of 1999. That will cut the cost of trade across frontiers, greatly simplify industrial cooperation and joint tendering. It will also remove a lot of the uncertainty in overseas contracts and create a world currency alongside the dollar and the yen. Exactly what effect a single currency area will have on Britain's competitiveness and on the City of London's dominance in the financial markets remains to be seen. The UK is not in the euro and is biding its time before deciding if it wants to join. The EU was set up to make war between its members impossible. It has become one of the most powerful economic blocs in the world. As this century ends, it's at a crossroads, with new members queuing up to join and the chance to establish itself as a world political force too. The voting system may be unfamiliar in 1999, but with so much being changed, the potential for EU influence is growing all the time. It's never been more important for people to cast their votes. Whatever you think of Europe, this election is your chance to have a say in the direction it takes in the future. Europe is, well, just over there. It's great to visit. We do most of our trade with it. But Britain is also part of Europe, and the way we play our part in Europe is changing. In June 1999, we'll vote in elections to the European Parliament under a new system of proportional representation. Each party will put forward a list of candidates, and independents can stand as well. You choose which list you want. You can't choose individuals, but you can choose your party. Britain will be divided up into Scotland, Wales and 9 English regions, each with several candidates. Northern Ireland stays as it is, with its own separate PR system.
We did that on the understanding that a commissioner would be available on Thursday to deal with if she was...
The European Parliament is the only directly elected institution of the European Union, and therefore the only part to give us voters a direct say in what's going on. Members don't sit according to which countries they're from, it's which political groups they support that counts here in the European Parliament. When Europe-wide legislation comes before them, it's up to them to speak for the people who elected them, for you and me in other words, and to support their party's views as well. But the Parliament has to relate to some other big players in Europe. The European Commission, for a start. It has the job of putting forward new ideas for European laws, as well as making sure everyone sticks by the promises they made in the treaties. Final decisions most often rest with the Council of Ministers, made up of ministers from each government, including the UK. In many areas these days, though, they need to get the European Parliament to agree too. Parliament's powers are growing. MEPs' decisions have helped set higher standards for our beaches. They've insisted on making our air and water cleaner. They've established rules to make streets safer. And they've warned industry that genetic engineering must take account of public concern. And the European Union is getting larger. Several of the former communist states of Eastern and Central Europe are queuing up to join the EU early next century. That means a rethink on the EU grants some areas get. It's big money, but not enough for everyone who benefits now, so there'll be winners and losers. The Common Agricultural Policy is being changed too. This time it's our trading partners who insist. Some farmers won't like it, but consumers will. And of course, there's Europe's new currency. Britain may not be using the euro from day one, but we can't ignore it. Many of our exporters will find they have to work in euros anyway. It'll make holidays in Europe a lot easier. Like it or not, Britain is part of Europe, and what Europe does affects us. With so many changes in the wind, don't lose your chance to influence the direction Europe takes. The Euro elections are coming. Use your vote. With the PR system, every vote counts.